Hey, welcome back, Fino here. On the 14th we get some special master missions, and one of them gives you a ticket that lets you pick a 5-star servant. Now there are some caveats. Firstly, this applies only to general pool servants, so you can't pick limiteds like Scotty or story-locked servants like Lance or Artoria. On top of this, it doesn't include Odysseus or Dioscuri. To keep whatever you pick, you gotta get him to Bond 5 in First Ascension by mid-June, or else they get repoed. Now if you already own a copy and meet those two requirements, you're good. Now maybe some of you are waifu friends and you already know what you're gonna pick, but if you're having trouble deciding, I've got a few pointers. As a rule of thumb, when you're picking between similar attackers, the most important question is what your current NP levels are. An NP3 Mordred is gonna feel a lot better to use than an NP1 Artoria, for example, though with closer gaps, you may have to do some math to figure that out. Speaking of Sabers, all three are AoE Buster servants, so comparing them is pretty straightforward. Altera has the highest attack of the three, but no battery. She's a beatstick with some crit synergy and the ability to remove defensive buffs. Mordred has a cleanse and a 30% battery, and like with Artoria, the 20% charge of pen skill will be something she can exploit once that comes out. Also got some crit synergy, much like Altera. Finally, there's Artoria, who gets a buff that can set all her cards to Buster for a turn. Like Mordred, she's got the 30% battery, but unlike Mordred, she's the most likely to continue getting buffs just on account of being FGO's mascot character. Of the three Sabers, I'd say she's the strongest. Moving on to archers, let's start with Artemis Orion, who is in most regards an expensive side grade to Uriel, and I wouldn't recommend her unless you're heavily invested already. Then there's Arjuna, who's been in a rough spot for a while and is a frequent contender for a title of worst 5-star servant. Probably not the one you want to go with. Then there's Napoleon, who's the least crap of the three archers, but I'm not a huge fan. He's got a 30% battery, a bunch of one-turn buffs, and a mix of Inform Pierce and Defense Pierce. He's decent, but nothing particularly busted. As far as beatstick archers go, you may be better off waiting for Nightingale's rerun. She's beholden to the Scotty system, but she is free. Now let's talk Lancers. Enkidu is a survivalist duelist with anti-divine utility. His kit is a bit clunky and his deck and NP are mismatched, but historically, FGO history, not real history, he's factored into some challenge quest solo clears, so if you don't have him already, you may find him a strong addition to your toolkit. Then there's Karna, who was strong at one point in time, but I find him pretty antiquated at this point. Like Arjuna, he's stuck with an awkward 25% battery, and his kit sort of veers off in two directions, with his mana burst being something you keep for his NP, while his crit buffs do their own thing. Not to mention you'd need to babysit him to really fill that second role, and I just don't think it's worth skewing your team building that much to accommodate him, if you have other options. Completing an already developed Karna might be okay, but if you're a fresh player and just need some sort of AoE Lancer, you can get Utsumi from the Fate Requiem event this year. Then there's Bradamante, who's in a weird spot. She's an AoE Quick Lancer, and while she can hypothetically loop, you generally want Valkyrie or Parvati for that role instead. Not to mention the coming dominance of Ars Lancers. In short, she's an okay beatstick, and maybe you can beat your stick to her NP, but I don't think she has much of a niche she can dominate at this point. Now on to Riders. Europa is kinda clunky for such a recent servant. She's premised on this almost tank and spank kind of gameplay that you can't really exploit on a Buster servant like her. As a consequence, she's just okay and not much else. Achilles is a solid AoE quick servant, and he can loop if you know what you're doing. He has some potential challenge quest utility with his taunt invuln combo, but he's not someone I really turn to for that application. Pretty good, but keep in mind that the future favors arts and Buster servants for farming. Then there's Ozymandias. He's a fairly strong single-target beatstick, and while a lot of his muscle is gated behind Imperial privilege, he can rig the odds without external help. 20% party charge is nice, and with his future upgrades, he can force sunny terrain on his NP and get even more buffs. The combination of NP seal and cooldown reduction is going to be really strong. On top of all this, his low cooldowns give him synergy with the Tamamo Vich system, meaning he can double up on his already strong effects with pretty much no effort. Lastly, there's Drake, who also has tremendous Tamamo Vich synergy. Her 50% battery means that with a super scope, or regular scope and the 20% charge of pen skill, she can 3-turn farm while doubling up on her Buster buff and getting Voyager of the Storm on 2 separate turns. And let's not forget about all the stars her NP generates. Drake has a very bright future if you can meet the minimum requirements to run a high-end Buster team. As for Assassins, you've got two options. Jack is decent, especially as a beatstick for short, decisive fights, the kind you'd bring the Scotty system for. But her short buff duration and weird heal skill often put you in a kill fast or die situation, and that kind of inflexibility is going to give you trouble in fights going forward. Ones where Kama or Shiki would have a much easier time. But if you passed on Kama and missed the K&K rerun, your pickings are going to be real slim, and you may have to consider biting the bullet. The other assassin is Osakabe Hime, and I'm sorry to say she's pretty underwhelming at this point. She was an experiment to see if they can make a quick support without creating Merlin levels of power creep, and it shows. Her kit is all over the place, and her defensive bent is something that would really only make sense on an art servant. Aside from her upgraded crit buff, her offensive suite isn't worth the price of admission. Now onto Berserkers. Nightingale is a utility Zerk who you want to bring to fights that call for a mix of debuff removal, healing, and a bit of muscle too. With her upgrade, she gets targeted debuff and insta-kill immunity. This dual focus on team healing and damage has always been a bit clunky, but Nightingale's bulk counts for a lot less nowadays than it used to in FGO's early days. Enemy crit creep has become rampant since Epic of Remnant, and the same fights where you'd potentially want Nightingale's utility are ones where she's liable to explode from a straight crit. She's unique, that counts for a fair bit, and if you're hell-bent, there are ways to utilize her, but you've got a lot of crust to work through. Zhang Yu is an AoE beatstick. He hits hard and crits hard. He can't loop, so he's not much of a farmer. And on top of this, he suffers from deck NP mismatch, limiting his synergy with relevant supports. I guess you could run him with Oki? Okay, don't actually do that. Then there's Vlad, who's a single target arts attacker, and he gets a lot of buffs both to his damage and survivability. Once he gets momentum, he can dumpster enemies with a combination of NPs and crits. Once Castoria comes along, she can give him some much needed consistency. The big drawback with Vlad is that the buy-in to make him effective feels really high. At NP1, he's a real potato. I don't remember if NP2 is much better, but the point is you need multiple copies to get much out of him. Now onto casters, let's start with Anastasia. She can be an effective arts looping farmer if you're in the market for one. That said, C got his rerun recently and you get his NP5 for free. And if you're going for Castoria anyway and also have at least 2 other 50% chargers, you can attempt to assemble the Chengong system instead, which if you aren't particularly attached to your grails, is my personal recommendation. With her buffs, Scheherazade is in a similar boat to Anastasia, just with more of her power budget committed to her anti-king niche. Xuanzang has a nice battery and she gets marginal improvements to her attacking kit over time. With her mismatched deck and NP, she can be a bit awkward to build around, but at a sufficiently high NP level, she can still do work. Good attacking casters are slim pickings, so you'll have to weigh how badly your account needs one. Tamamo might not seem like the sexiest choice when Castoria is around the corner. Her lack of charge donation really doesn't help the comparison. But Tamamo does have a legitimate use even after our new Arts Overlord shows up. You'll still encounter long attritional fights where you can leverage a lot of healing and cooldown reduction to tank and spank bosses, especially in combination with servants like Jean and Mesh. Tamamo is a lot more resistant to being chipped out than Castoria, and while hunting for charge isn't the most fun thing in the world, she can enable that older style of looping. And for an extra niche benefit, Tamamo no Maya can go toe-to-toe with many of Tamamovic's boss forms. Finally, we come to Ragey, Wavy, in a Cagey. Neat might be free and happy, but Waver does some serious work. That's why he's in the cage in the first place. Between his 50% combined battery on a single target, 20% splash on everyone else, and his variety of offensive and defensive buffs, Waver gives a ton of value. He also has one of the few relevant bond CEs in the game for a nice party-wide buster buff. The stun on his NP isn't reliable, but its other effects are quite useful. Not to mention, for overcharge-reliant attackers, you can just put unreturning formation first to soften enemies up while gaining those overcharge effects. Going from NP0 to NP1, Waver will give you by far the most value of any servant on this list. Really, the only downside is that because he's a generic support, he's never the most broken option. But what he does do is give you the most flexible support, charge donation which is essential if you want to do any amount of farming, and he operates as a supplementary charger for incomplete Scotty or Vich systems, also fights that give awkward amounts of NP refund. And I'd consider him an essential part of the Gong system. Having your charge split over 3 skills is slower, sure, but you can decide to dole out only a part of it to your main attacker, saving the 30% for someone like Castoria or even himself to give Gong a beefier NP. Once we get JP's skill skip, the slow animations stop being an issue too. Overall, I'd consider him the strongest choice for the SSR ticket, assuming you don't already have a copy. Let's wrap things up with the extra class servants. Jean, aka God's Chosen Potato, is an absolute attrition machine, and you can cheese a lot of fights by sticking a Prisma Cosmos on her and arch chaining till the sun goes down. If you already have Tamamo, you can make this a team-wide show with her and Mash to effectively become immortal in a lot of fights. Jean's combination of team-wide invulnerability, healing, debuff removals, stuns, and passive star generation is a crazy amount of utility. Once you have a generic charger like Waver, I'd consider Jean the second highest priority. The other extra class servant is Jinako. If you have literally any other Moon Cancer, I'd write her off immediately. And even if you don't, BB's event becomes a main interlude, letting you get her to fill the Moon Cancer niche. The applications for a defensively oriented AoE Moon Cancer are very thin to begin with, and Jinako's potato damage doesn't help. Alright, in conclusion, the top tier of servants you can pick with this ticket are Waver, Jean, and Tamamo, in that order of importance. That said, all these servants do their job at NP1. The benefits of a subsequent level are a bit suspect, especially for Waver, so don't go for extra copies if you can help it. Jean is a little different. The defense on our NP goes up by 10% from NP 1 to 2, and that can save you some misery. I personally wouldn't take it over a stronger core attacker, but it's something to keep in mind. After that, you have the high tier picks like Artoria, Enkidu, Ozymandias, and Drake. These are the non-utility power picks. From around this point onward, your NP levels and team building gaps are going to decide who you need. Alright, yeah, that's all I got. Hope this was helpful. Like if you like this video, subscribe for more, and come watch me on Twitch where I stream every weekend at 3 p.m. Pacific time, Friday through Sunday. Good luck, and I'll see you next time. Peace.